Hi Antybu. Let me start by saying that I really appreciate your channel. I think your material is clear, focused, thoughtful, and humorous. Your critiques of the likes of Glenn Beck, How the World Works, and Stephen Chowder have been incisive and spot on, and frankly, your exposing of Brock Lolly as a plagiarist deserves an award. Seriously, I don't understand why anyone bothers saying anything else about that guy. Anytime Brock opens his mouth, the only thing that should be said in response is, Brock, you are a plagiarist, and no one can ever trust a single thing you say. All due respect to people like David John Wellman, who I like a hell of a lot, I think he's wasting his time. You have completely, single-handedly undermined that miserable hack, and the entire YouTube community, atheist, theist, and otherwise alike, owes you a debt of gratitude. But I was looking through your back catalog and I found several videos on vegetarianism, and I was sorely disappointed with what I thought was the poor quality of argument therein. So I thought I'd do a pair of response videos and try to explain why I think your arguments in those videos are weak, unconvincing, and just generally of poor quality. So for starters, you dismiss the environmental argument against vegetarian by saying this.
There's no doubt in my mind that giant factory farms spew out an enormous amount of pollution. These large amounts of cows do produce loads of the greenhouse gas methane. But the best solution to this problem is innovation. Methane, as you might know, can be used as a power source. In fact, some smaller farms actually harvest the methane from cow feces in order to power their farms.
Oh, it's a river of poo! So that's the size of digester you need to power the farm.
Yes, it is. It does about 90% of our electricity.
So eating beef produced by this farm wouldn't do quite as much environmental damage. And as technology advances, similar processes of harvesting this energy will most definitely emerge, become more efficient, and be possible on a much larger scale.
By this reasoning, Antybu, we should never bother with any kind of conservation or environmentalism at all. I mean, seriously, why bother recycling or driving a fuel-efficient car or trying to reduce your carbon footprint when future innovation will fix everything? Clearly, innovation is important, and I'm all for trying to find new ways to reappropriate waste for useful purposes. But despite the Mythbusters clip that you showed, there are currently no plausible ways to use animal waste from a factory farm for energy. If there were, this wouldn't be a problem. Agribusiness would love to cut their power bills in this way if they could, but they can't, so they don't. We have to make decisions right now on the basis of what we know to be the case today, not on the basis of new technology that may or may not come to fruition. And right now, we have a serious environmental problem going on, and it is due in large part to factory farming, which supplies 98% of the meat in this country. If those wonderful new technologies actually come to pass, and they really do work as well as you imply they will, then that will indeed obviate the environmental argument for vegetarianism. But in the meantime, eating meat causes tremendous damage to the environment, and we can't avoid our responsibility for that by crossing our fingers and hoping that some messianic technology comes along to undo it all.
Until then, fishing and hunting could actually be considered the green alternative. Hunting deer, for example, actually aids the environment because it balances the ecosystem where deer would otherwise overcrowd and eliminate other animal species in the area.
This is just a disingenuous argument, Antybu. Less than 0.5% of all the meat in the country comes from hunting or personal fishing. Even if your point about the environmental benefits of hunting hold water, and I'm not granting you that they do, you still have the other 99.5% of the meat market left to defend. I'll put it this way. If you and every other person out there who eats meat reduces their meat consumption by 99.5%, I'd consider that a win for the vegetarians, even if you didn't actually become one.
Argument number 2. Veganism or vegetarianism is healthier than eating meat. Therefore, people should stop eating meat altogether. It's true that low meat or no meat diets actually can extend a person's life expectancy by several years. However, most vegetarians and vegans like to compare the health benefits of their lifestyle to people who eat meat excessively. But I have yet to find a study which shows vegans and vegetarians have a significant health advantage to people who eat low meat diets.
Then you clearly didn't do very much research before you made this video. Not only are there studies that show vegetarians have a significant health advantage over people who eat low meat diets, the single largest study ever conducted on the topic showed precisely that. The study I'm referring to is the so-called China study by nutrition researcher Dr. T. Colin Campbell. Completed in 2005, the China study analyzed the lifestyle factors, diets, and diseases of people in rural China and Taiwan over a 20-year period and produced more than 8,000 statistically significant associations between dietary factors and disease. Amongst their findings was precisely what you said you hadn't seen: strong evidence that even low-meat diets lead to higher rates of disease. And Campbell is no hack, by the way. He's a professor of nutritional biochemistry at Cornell, and his study was conducted jointly by Cornell and Oxford. Now, to be fair, the China study has not been without its share of legitimate criticism from other scientists. But A, all scientific research has its critics, and B, there's been a lot of support from within the scientific community as well. But even if the China study is fatally flawed in some way, you've already conceded that a low-meat diet is much better for you than a high-meat diet, which is what the average American meat eater is on. That means, in the very least, the health argument is a good reason to seriously reduce the amount of meat that one consumes. Granted, that's not the same as a good reason to go vegetarian, but it would move everyone a lot closer to vegetarian, and I would at least consider that a step in the right direction.
But the main problem with this argument is that people do have the right to lead unhealthy lifestyles if they choose. When a person does something dangerous or unhealthy, as long as they understand the risks and aren't harming anybody else, you shouldn't force them to act differently.
Well, first off, meat eaters are harming someone else. They're harming the animals. But we'll set that aside for now, since you deal with that later. I'll deal with it later, too. The real problem with the argument you've just made is that you're moving the goalposts. Before you were claiming that these arguments fail to convince you to go vegetarian. Now you're claiming they fail to convince you that we should outlaw eating meat. Those are two separate conclusions. I'm not in favor of outlawing eating meat, but the fact that many people have a right to engage in risky behaviors does not mean there aren't good reasons for them not to do so. That is all the argument from health is trying to prove.
Number 3. If all the land the United States uses for meat production were turned into farms that grow crops for a human diet, we could feed the world. To make this claim, it first needs to be shown that such a conversion of land is even possible. It also has to be shown that it's economically feasible. A conversion like this would require a huge influx of trained workers that might not be possible over any reasonable period of time, which could in turn play havoc with the economy. And even ignoring these problems, there would probably be a transition period in which we would have to figure out how to feed everybody. The list of potential major problems goes on and on and on, and until a team of experts tackles this issue, nobody should be making such bold claims.
You're certainly right that this is a complicated problem, but you're wrong to suggest that experts haven't tackled the issue. One place to look, for example, is Peter Singer and Jim Mason's book, The Ethics of What We Eat. That deals with the issue directly and with considerable agronomical analysis. But more importantly, you strawman the shit out of the argument. No one thinks we're going to be able to just flip a switch and overnight the whole country is going to go vegetarian, leading to these massive problems you cite. If it happens, and I'm not assuming it will, but if it does, like any major social change, it will happen gradually. We will solve practical problems as they arise. And in the end, the basic fact is undeniable. Our current use of land, crops, water, and other resources in the production of factory farm meat is grotesquely inefficient. Anyone concerned with the efficient use of these resources should consume less meat, or better yet, give it up entirely.
Finally, number 4. Humans did not evolve to eat meat.
Okay, this one I'm actually going to grant you. The argument that we didn't evolve to eat meat is both specious, in that it relies heavily on cherry-picked evidence, and irrelevant. We didn't evolve to use computers either, but that doesn't mean doing so is immoral. But that irrelevance swings both ways. Sometimes people argue that because we evolved to eat meat, it is therefore morally acceptable. But our teeth and our digestive tract can't distinguish from the meat of a cow and the meat of another human being. So I'm not saying we didn't evolve to eat meat. I'm saying whether or not we evolved to eat meat is morally irrelevant. If it were, the fact that we evolved to eat meat would not only be a defense of eating meat, it would also be a defense of cannibalism. I realize that you, Antybu, didn't make this argument, but I wanted to shoot it down anyway since we're on the topic. Okay, that's it for arguments that you consider the weakest ones for vegetarian, Antybu, and in the next video I'll analyze and critique your claim to what you think is the best argument for vegetarianism, the moral argument.